going to be talking about React. So what is React? And I want to talk about what React is and why React is. Why do we have React? What is the purpose of it? We know based on the project last week that we can build websites with vanilla JavaScript with HTML and CSS, right? So why do we even have this thing called React? So, oh, that's good. Looks like Lambda School is offline. That's okay. Let's see if we can get back to... that was weird. Oh, yeah, but I think this is just a cached version. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to open up this page right here. And let's look at this while we talk about what React is. So React is a JavaScript library. It competes with most JavaScript frameworks, but it's not in and of itself a framework. It's technically considered a library. So JavaScript libraries are packages that people write. They write JavaScript code to help other developers be able to do things easier. So they take vanilla JavaScript and they write a whole bunch of functions that we can use that run a bunch of complicated JavaScript that we as developers use to make our lives a little bit easier, so we don't have to write the complicated JavaScript. We let the library author do that and for us, and then we just use their functions that they've already created. So libraries help web developers build large-scale applications a lot more effectively and a lot more quickly. So, for example, React was built by the Facebook team because they were facing some pretty serious problems, scaling problems as a company. So if you take a look at this image, this is just a standard Facebook feed here. And if you look at everything that's going on right here, just inside this one view, and this is, as we know, this is just a small part of what Facebook is. There's a lot going on here, and this page is very performant. In other words, you can be clicking on things and navigating through Facebook, scrolling through the feed, and be able to, and it keeps up with you. It reacts quickly. It displays new data very quickly. They've done a very good job of this, but they weren't always at this point. Adam asked what a major difference is between a library and a framework. So it's kind of basically the how much it does for you. So a framework, like Angular or Vue, does a lot of the work for you under the hood, and but it's also very opinionated on how you use their framework to build a web application. Libraries give us are a lot simpler and a lot smaller and less opinionated. So they give us a lot of functions and different things that we can use within them, but they're not opinionated as other things. In other words, they don't tell us this is exactly how you have to build a web app using React. And we'll talk about best practices. Of course, there's best practices, and the community behind JavaScript have kind of built up some patterns that we will suggest you use. But there's a lot of different ways to build the same application, even with the same library, depending on who you are as a developer and your personal preferences. React tries to stay out of the way of those personal preferences and stay less opinionated and just give you the tools that you need. Let's see. So Tom says, after looking through the source code, it looks like a state machine library with a scalable rendering engine. Reminds me of OpenGL's implementation of states. It feels like a lot of AJAX calls to keep it lightweight. Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And we'll talk about all of that as we get further into React. I'm not going to jump into it right now, Tom, for those of in the class that wouldn't understand our discussion right now. So, but we'll get to the point that most of you will be able to look at that and say, okay, that makes sense. So, so we've got this Facebook page, and using just our vanilla JavaScript and even jQuery, building an application like this for millions and millions and millions of users became a really big ordeal and not as viable for a business solution as it used to be. And so the React team built the Facebook team built React. Yeah, I said that backwards. The Facebook team built React, and to solve their particular problem of building a high performance app that could scale a lot easier. And just one last caveat before we move on. React is just one way of doing things. There's other libraries and frameworks out there today that perform just as well or even better than React. They have a different way of doing things, and that's okay. React is just one way to solve this kind of business problem. So keep that in mind as we go through React. We teach React. Probably the biggest reason we teach React is because that's where most of the jobs are today. The higher percentage of jobs that you could get out of this school will be in React. And we also teach it because we all love React and agree that it's a great framework for what we want you guys to be able to do by the time you're done with Lambda. Okay, so React as a library relies on or has built this paradigm of using components to build a web application. So you have experience with web components at this point, and you've learned how JavaScript can manipulate the DOM and for a lot of different things. So React is going to help us do that, but it's going to abstract away kind of some of the complicated things of working with the DOM and give us some tools, mainly some functions and methods to still manipulate the DOM, but make it easier on us as the developers. For example, we won't use things like document.getElement by class name. So we'll move away from that and use React's methods for getting things from the DOM. Let's take a look at one more web application, possible web application. So this is a React. This is just a template here. This is a template you could buy that was written in React, and but I think this displays pretty well this idea of building a complicated web application with the idea of the component paradigm. So let me grab my little pen. So when you're thinking in web components, we like to look at a big application like this and break things down into different components. So you'll always have kind of a wrapper application, a wrapper component. that just wraps everything. And then inside of this wrapper component, I can see us building, sorry, this is difficult with the mouse, kind of two components, children components inside that wrapper component that kind of separates our application into this sidebar and into the main body. Let's see, it's pretty big on mine. Let me see if I can zoom in. So maybe like that. Is that better? Try and keep the questions pulled up. Okay, so we'll just clear that. So keep in mind those two, the outside wrapper, then we've got, boxes. Much better. That'll be quicker. So we've got our wrapper one, we've got our two that kind of split the page into our sidebar and our the main body. And then from here, we just dig down further and further. So we can say, all right, inside of this, we've got, catch up to me, there we go. We've got a header and like this main section here. Inside of our header, we've got kind of this navigation component here, search component, this stuff up here. Inside our main feed, we've got these four. Actually, this would probably be like something like this row would be a component, et cetera, et cetera. So we can build this, we can break this all the way down, and even down to these specific pieces right here could all be different components that are composed together, that are built together or composed into this web application. Now, there's a couple reasons that React decided to go this route of composability, using components to build a web application, and it's worked really, really well. And a lot of the main frameworks that we see today are following the same kind of paradigm of thought. So using components and to build a website gives us the ability to make one component and plug it in a lot of different places in our web app and reuse the same code that we've already written. So you know the term being dry in our code, and composing web applications with components helps us to stay dry. For example, if we look at these components across the top of this body here, these four yellow, let's finish these out. These four yellow components could all be the same component. So we've written one component and used it in 4 places. And then inside that one component, we've got 2 green components. We've got a kind of data part on the left, and we've got a graph on the right. So we've, since our yellow component is being used in 4 places, we're always going to have this graph on the right, no matter where we put this component, and we're going to have the data on the left. Now the data section on the left has 3 more components, or maybe we just left this data component on the left in charge of rendering all 3 pieces of data. or maybe we built them out into their own components. Yeah, that's a great point, Emily. Similar to mix-ins, but with JavaScript. And Patrick, yes, you can use this with Electron. Sorry, I didn't see your question there. So instead of coming to this page and writing 4 different blocks of the same code for each of these sections here, we wrote one function, one component that renders 2 other components, and then we reuse that component over and over again. So already our development time has been cut by 4 when we're talking about this section up here. So we've cut down our development time by 75%, and we are keeping our code really, really dry. We're not reusing, we're not repeating our code in 4 different places. So this also leads into how React is so performant and how it can be so fast with high amounts of data on the DOM, which we'll get into in just a minute here. Okay, so components. React is a library that helps us build large-scale applications quickly and easily. React uses the paradigm of using reusable components to build out a web application. That was a lot of the word use in one sentence. So with React, we build websites, web applications with reusable components. So let's talk about quickly how React actually puts things onto the screen for us. So React uses a, let's see, what is it called? So React uses this thing called the virtual DOM. So we know about the DOM. The DOM is what is in the browser. It's the elements that make up what your user is viewing on the screen. React uses what we like to call the virtual DOM, or what is called the virtual DOM. And it's kind of the reason that React is so fast and performant, because the way that the Facebook team designed this is actually kind of ingenious. So to get an idea of the virtual DOM, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's this idea of a kind of off to the side of the regular DOM that you see on the screen. We're building a virtual representation of what we want to put on the actual DOM. So React builds a virtual DOM, which is this virtual representation of what it's going to render in the actual DOM that we see on the screen. Working with the DOM API is really hard. And if we were to build an app like this or something like Facebook, it would be pretty slow. We would have a lot of data on this page. We would have a lot of handlers and listeners, and it would really bog down our browser, and our user experience would be affected, because people don't, nowadays, we want everything so fast. People don't like going to a website that's kind of feels slow and clunky. So the virtual DOM helps us take care of that problem. What the virtual DOM is essentially is a programming paradigm that helps us build kind of our perfect world DOM in this virtual setting, before we ever render anything to the actual browser before the actual DOM gets rendered. So this virtual DOM is always thinking, this DOM element should have access to this data and should have these specific handlers attached to it and should have this particular look and layout. So the virtual DOM is building all of this for us in a environment that's a lot faster than actually rendering things to the screen. And then once we have that idea of, once we have the virtual DOM built, then React takes that virtual DOM and builds out the actual DOM in the fastest way that it can be built, and kind of in a minimalistic way. If there's maybe some listeners that we don't need as part of the real DOM, then it won't add that to the real DOM. So let me address these questions. Let's see. So Tom says, we are rendering to a secondary buffer, the virtual DOM. I like that way of putting it. React is doing a diff against the current DOM, the screen DOM, and then making changes that get rendered to the screen, like using buffer. Yeah, that is exactly right. And that's exactly what we're going to go over right now, is how then our DOM updates. Joseph says, is the virtual DOM a staging environment? Yep, that's another really good way to look at the virtual DOM. Patrick says, is there a reason React apps all have the same look, i.e. the modern Facebook look? Yeah, so not all. It's not necessarily React that gives it that look. It's more of the design components that you're using, the design libraries. So, for example, this is a material design template. It's using kind of the material design ideas. So material design is a design library that the Google team put together. And they've been very specific in what things look like, how they behave, and they give a lot of rules for what things look like. So you see a lot of websites that kind of look like this. Now this is just the modern day look. This isn't necessarily because it's React. A view template would look very similar to this if it's using kind of modern design of today, kind of the flat design that is so prevalent in web applications today. So good question. It's not necessarily a React thing. It's more of a design thing. Okay, man, questions rolling in. This is awesome. So Brian asks, the virtual DOM just takes in a lightweight JavaScript object versus a huge DOM object, thus increasing performance. Yeah, see, you guys know this. I don't even need to be here. I think you should all just go home because you guys know React already. Cool, I like that, Tom. This is a React app without CSS. Get out of my way, Zoom stuff. Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, I think those of you who have commented have kind of put this idea of the virtual DOM in really good ways. It's kind of a buffer. We'll talk about right now how changes get to the actual DOM through this buffer idea of the virtual DOM. The virtual DOM is basically just a staging environment. The virtual DOM just takes in a lightweight JavaScript object versus huge DOM object, thus increasing performance. Okay, those are all really, really good. So, who was it that brought up okay, so Tom brought up the idea of making changes to our DOM. So we know that making a change to the DOM itself is we call it an expensive procedure. Expensive just means that it takes a lot of computing power. So as we're grabbing onto specific specific DOM nodes on the actual DOM and doing something to it, changing it. The browser it takes the browser a lot of computing power to do that. And when you have something like Facebook, where changes are happening over and over and over and over again, and there's a lot of big data already on this page already, and you have to make these changes, like you're scrolling down and your feed keeps loading more DOM nodes onto the page, it can really slow down the browser. So this is where the virtual DOM really, really shines, is how it takes these changes that we want to make on the DOM and how it goes about doing that. So let's see. Let's look at this one first. So what we do now, if you're getting kind of stressed and worried about how we build this virtual DOM, React takes care of that for you. So just realize now we don't actually have to do the virtual DOM stuff. React, that's all under the hood in React. It takes care of that for you. It takes care of updating the DOM. All we need to do is write some JavaScript code some JavaScript functions that return HTML. And then if we want to make changes on the DOM, we need to have our function smart enough to make those changes, and React takes care of this entire cycle for us. So in our application, we write those functions that I was just talking about that spit out HTML. And React, the library, will build a component tree, and from our application, from these functions that we're writing, and it will create a virtual DOM. So don't worry about this part on the left yet, because we're going to talk about that as we come back around the cycle. So the first time the browser opens up, our application runs, it creates a virtual DOM, and our virtual DOM is now a component tree that gets built to the actual DOM. So our screen shows up, and then an event is triggered. So if we're in Facebook and we scroll down to the end of our feed, an event is triggered to load more posts into our feed. So that trigger happens, and our app knows about it. Our functions know what to do and how to create the HTML for that. So then React marks our virtual DOM as dirty. And then it knows to, once the virtual DOM is marked as dirty, it knows to look through every node in the component tree and compare it to what's already on the DOM. If that node that it's looking at has not changed, it won't make that change to the DOM. So if we're looking at this page here, and you had just scrolled on your feed and you're trying to load more posts down below, React is going to look at this whole sidebar and say, okay, nothing here has changed. I'm not going to re-render this on the DOM, on the real DOM, because that would take a lot of extra computing power that we don't need to use. I don't need to re-render this top bar. I don't need to re-render this posting section. I don't need to re-render any of these ads or anything on the right here. All I need to do is add a few extra DOM nodes at the bottom based on the data that I'm getting back from the database. So we just did what would be a very expensive thing if we had to re-render this over and over again every time we scrolled down to the bottom of this feed. And we took away all of the really expensive part, the part of re-rendering like 2/3 of this page, and we cut that out of the process, out of the system. So we don't have to re-render all of these things because the virtual DOM, because React knows that those haven't changed. Let me scroll to here, see if we have other questions. Yep, dirty means a change has been made. Go home your truck. So dirty is just a flag for React to check if opposition. Yep. These are all really, really good questions, guys. Yeah, you guys are, those who are posting here, I can tell are understanding these well. Okay, cool. So I actually have another graphic to show you, Emily, that will help explain this idea of the component tree. Oh yeah, Patrick says the component tree is similar to the DOM tree that you guys have been talking about. Before we look at my graphic, let's just see if there's an image here. Okay, yeah, these will be really good. So let's look at this. And let's just open this up in a new tab. Okay, so this is a component tree. This is a DOM tree where you've got DOM nodes that are nested inside different other DOM nodes, right? So this is a DOM tree, and this is very, very similar to what a React component tree will look like. So keep this in mind as we look at this next graphic here. So these are component trees here. And this is our DOM tree out here. So we've got DOM. This is the virtual DOM. And this is our data. Model, when you see the word model in programming, it usually means data. Okay, so we started out and we built this component tree, which got translated into a DOM tree here. And that was when we first got to our website and first rendered our website on the screen, on the DOM. And this took in all of the, just the first data that was available to us from our application, from our functions. And this component tree is built out. Then everything in red here is something that is a change. So then our data changed, and React, the virtual DOM, kept this old component tree and built a new component tree and compared the two, the old to the new. So the virtual DOM is taking a look at the old component tree that it had built before. It's looking at it, the new component tree that it has, and it sees that only one component in this component tree has changed. So then it sends this just the one component that changed, the diff, and instead of re-rendering the entire DOM because something changed, it just made a simple patch to this one single DOM node. Yeah, that's funny. I've never heard it said that way, but I like that. Oh, where did my controls go? There we go. So this is what makes the virtual DOM so powerful, is it can look at what is currently being displayed and do a diff check based on new data that comes in or new events that happen and are triggered, and then only send that single DOM node that it's changed, only update that single DOM node. Now all of a sudden we're not re-rendering the entire page like we had been for years and years. We're just re-rendering, just doing a patch on our single node. Cool. So there's a lot to take in, and I want us to take a little bit of a breather. We're going to catch up on comments, and if you guys have any other questions at this point, we'll take any more questions and then we'll take a little bit of a break and we'll jump into our actual code for the day. So let's see, we got past our virtual DOM stuff. Yep, DOM tree, component tree. These are illustrated really well here. We looked at that comment. Yep, you can think of this as Git versioning in a way. And then Joseph says compares state changes and only adjusts one component, thus making DOM manipulation less expensive. Absolutely. Now we could do this in vanilla JavaScript. We could look at our old state. We could figure out which, based on our new state, which node is updating, and do this updating, this whole process here on our own in vanilla JavaScript. But it's a lot to do to make it really optimized. And why would we do that when we have React that's already done it for us? So this is the why of React, because we had this problem that big applications like Facebook were not, it was really hard to scale big applications like Facebook and other things. And even though we can do this all in vanilla JavaScript, we now have a lightweight library that does it for us. So that's why React. So why doesn't Facebook do this on the site-wide level and load everything on one app page? For example, if I click someone's profile pic, it loads a new page with their profile. That's a really great question. I don't know the answer to that, though. That's a business decision by the team. There's ways within React to do this kind of thing without that page reload, and so and there's ways to do it to make it so the page does reload. I think, I could be wrong, but I think they're doing some of their application with server-side rendering, which we'll talk about in like 2 weeks. But that could be the reason that some of that is happening. So Facebook only uses React in certain parts of their sites, right? Not the entire thing. Yeah, I think they still have some parts of Facebook itself or other things that aren't built in React. I'm sure they're working on getting whatever it's all just a business decision. So like we said at the beginning, there are other tools that do the same thing as React does, or there's other tools that solve the same problem in a different way. And when you're looking at an organization as big as Facebook, it's almost guaranteed that they're going to have a couple things done this way, a couple things done a different way, because for those different projects, it makes sense to use different tools. So it's really good habit to get into to approach business problems like that. You'll find now that you're kind of getting into this JavaScript front-end framework / library world, you're going to find people that have very strong opinions towards which tools they use. And sometimes that strong opinion will block them from using a tool that may be better for a specific project. And so I would caution you guys against saying, okay, React is the best and the only way that I can ever write a web application, so that's all I'm ever going to use. When in reality, for certain situations, there will be different tools that would be better for that project. So taking that same mindset, Facebook as a really large organization with a lot of different projects going on has, I'm sure has made business decisions to use different tools for different things. Let's see. Any idea where the line is between React and HHVM on Facebook? I'm not sure what HHVM is. Can someone help me out? What is HHVM? Landing page for HHVM. I'll take a look at that. Let's take a 5-minute short break, and we'll come back and code, and I'll look at this HHVM. I will start a timer so you guys know when to come back. Cool. See you in a few minutes. All right, guys, come on back. Okay. To answer your question real quick, Vera. So I I've heard of Hack, the PHP language, or Hack is a language developed by Facebook um, to that kind of helps PHP developers not have to use so much PHP because PHP kind of stinks. Um, at least that's the general feeling in uh, a lot of programming circles. So I don't know where, or so HHMV or HHVM is the virtual machine that runs Hack. So in your browser, we've got the JavaScript engine that executes JavaScript code for the browser and lets us do all these things inside our browser. So HHVM is the kind of the equivalent to that, but for running the language Hack. I don't know as far as I think this has been out for 4 or 5 years. As far as how much Facebook uses it, I don't know. They started out in PHP, so it's probably for a lot of their legacy code for people to go in and update their legacy PHP code and do it in Hack instead of PHP. So, good question, and I learned something new. I didn't know that that was the virtual machine for Hack. So we're going to move away from some of this stuff and we're going to jump into our code here. Just real quick, I do want to point you to, obviously, this resource right here. This is the React docs. And they're actually really, really, really good. There's really, really good documentation in here. This is a great place to look at when you have questions concerning some of your projects that you'll do over the next few weeks. So I would, if you've got extra time, if you finish projects early and finish some of the stretch stuff, jump in here and start reading, familiarizing yourself with the docs. Jump into Hello World, or we're going to talk about JSX today. So maybe going into introducing JSX will help you understand that a little bit better beyond our lecture and projects. And then we'll go through, it looks like we'll go through all of these in these next 4 weeks. A couple of these advanced guides, but not all of them. So things like context, code splitting, fragments we'll touch on a little bit. Optimizing performance, we won't get into that too much. So there's a lot of things in this advanced guide that we just simply don't have time to teach you in these 4 weeks. So this would be a good place to start learning about those more advanced topics. We do learn about some of these though. Higher order components, we'll touch on fragments a little bit. That's not too difficult. JSX in depth, we should be able to, you'll be pretty well versed in JSX by the time we're done. Okay, I'm going to close this down a little bit and we're going to pull up our editor. I need to lower this because the Zoom tools. Okay, so what we're going to do is first, I kind of want you guys to follow along with me at this point, and I'll tell you when to actually be following along and when to just stop and watch and listen. So first thing I want you to do is, let's see, let's zoom in on this. So first, create a folder. So in your terminals, open your terminal, create a folder called React. Now, then you'll create a file called hello world .html. Anyway, there we go. Okay. Get to that point. I'll give you just a minute to do that. And then open this up in your code editor. Okay, so in our hello world HTML, we are going to build out this kind of basic HTML file here. We can close this down more, I think. Okay, I'll post this on CS13. So the HTML. Okay, so we understand these. We don't have to get into what's going on here. We've got our HTML tag, our head, our body, and our script tags. And then for right now, we're going to be writing our app between right here in these script tags. So the first thing we want to do, or I want you to notice this div right here. What's cool about React is we're going to write our React app completely in JavaScript. We're going to write functions that return HTML, and we are going to then use React to target this DOM node, this div, and React will put our entire application in between this div tag. So this is why they call it a single page application, even though React apps obviously have a lot of different views and different pages, but they call it single page because it all boils down to this one HTML page into this one div tag here. Okay, so to get started, no, we're just going to start this way. Linda asked about this being written inline always. We're just going to start it this way, and then even by the end of today, we'll be breaking out into different files. Okay, so we're going to add these two. We're going to include React into our project with these two CDN scripts here. Oh. But we need that. We need these above. There we go. So I'll post these as well. Okay, so include these two script tags above the script tag where our application is going. What this does is this brings in our React library and a library called React DOM. They've separated out these two different libraries. React is what's going to let us write our HTML in, or let us create these DOM nodes within our JavaScript, and then React DOM is going to be in charge of actually adding them to our actual DOM. So once we've got those added, we can now start writing React. So what we're going to do, just watch me for a second, and then for this part, and then I'll let you guys build this out yourselves. So I'm going to create a variable called myElement, and I'm going to use the React function method that we have from this, or React object, excuse me, React object we get from this library here. And on this object, we have a method called createElement. So this is exactly what I was talking about, where sometimes the syntax can be a little bit scary, but where it's very simple like this, we can see that this is just an object called React with a property that is a function, so a method that we're calling right here called createElement. Then we're going to give createElement right now just 3 arguments. We're going to tell this method, we're going to give it, the first argument is going to be the type of node we want to create. So we're going to tell it that, and that's within a string. So we're going to tell it that we want to create a H1 node. And then we're going to give it an object here with a property called class name. Now this is a little bit funny. We're used to just doing something like this, right? But since class is one of those keywords that we don't want to try and overrule, React has named it class name. So this basically adds that class tag to our DOM node. So just keep that in mind when you see class name. That basically means we're going to add this class heading to our DOM node, to our H1 node. Okay, the last thing we're going to do is give this H1 tag something inside it. So inside a header tag, we usually have text, right? So we're going to pass in a string for our third argument here. And we're just going to say, hello world. And with that, we have created our first React element, which we're soon going to use React DOM to write to the actual DOM here. Oh, that's a good idea. Let's do word wrap. Editor layout. No. There we go. Okay, I'm doing this for you guys because I absolutely hate word wrap. All right, so let's first just take a look at what my element is. So we've created this element and within React. So let's take a look at what this is. So I'm going to refresh this page and open our console. Oh, I need to save my file. Okay, there we go. So here is our console log from right here, line 23. So let's look at this. First of all, you'll notice that my element is just an object. Okay, that's all that was created here. We passed in these 3 things to a function, and it returned an object. So let's see what's on this object. We've got a lot of stuff here. Key, we don't have anything there yet. We'll learn about key later. We've got this object called props, which we'll drill into in a second. This ref. Oh, here we go. So we can see that this element, the type of this element is that H1 that we gave it. And then these are just some private things there. So let's look at the props. So this props object is kind of interesting. You'll notice that everything we put in right here has come through on this props object. So our children is basically what in React, we'll talk about children quite a bit, but in React, children is basically what's inside a React element. So like if we had something nested inside this h1 tag up here, or excuse me, this div tag, say we did an h1 tag, oh, auto completed. Then this would be the child of, would be included in the children of this div tag here. So, and then if we have some text inside here, this text would be the children and the children of this h1 tag, just like in this h1 tag, hello world has become our children. And then class name, we're receiving that from this object here. So it's just an object. We've just created an object. Now let's take this object and let's render it to our DOM here. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use React DOM, which comes from our second package up here. And this is going to have a method called render. And then this method, again, we're just calling a function, right? This method takes 2 arguments. We're going to pass in the element that we've created. And then we're going to do a little bit of JavaScript right here. So we're going to say document.get element by ID and pass it our target DOM node here. So this piece of code is going to be invoked, and it's going to return a DOM node right here. So render, the render function takes in our element that we've created and the DOM node that we want to attach it to. So don't get too confused by this. I know you guys have seen this before, so you should understand what is going on here. And we're just taking the element that we've created and passing it and attaching it to this DOM node. Clint says if we put h1 bracket in CSS, it would recognize the type h1 on the object, or would we need to be using heading? Nope, this will, so you'll see, we'll inspect this as right now as we actually render it to the DOM. And you'll see that this element is our render is going to take this element, create an actual h1 DOM node, and attach it to as a child of this div node here. So yep, you'll be able to do h1 brackets in CSS, which we'll look at right now. So here's our h1. Woohoo! Let's inspect it. Let's see what HTML this line right here spit out for us. Oh, come on. Oh, yeah, that's okay. We can see it. So we've got our target div, and inside our target div, we've now added an h1 element with the class heading. It's so cool. So with our JavaScript, we just created this whole DOM node all by ourselves, with a little help from React, of course. Okay, I should be seeing like minds blown emoji craziness right now in Slack. Come on, this is cool stuff. What I want you to do for a couple minutes is inside your HTML, I want you to build this out. Use this as a reference. Obviously, you haven't memorized the code here, but I just want you to be typing it out and getting used to seeing what's going on here. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And we want to get to a point that you can see this here. Thank you, Michael. Okay, I'll be right back in about 3 minutes. Okay, so hopefully you're able to get this rendering. So let's see. So, oh yeah, we talked about that. Okay, so let's move on. Now, this function here is powerful, but not very scalable. We don't want to have to. I would hate to think about building something like this with this syntax here, right? This is not a fun way to build a web application if you had to build every single node with this. So React gave us an abstraction on top of this method called JSX. And it's literally just the letters JSX. And what it is it's a way to write HTML-like code in JavaScript. So it's going to replace this stuff here. We don't have to do this in order to build big applications, because that's not scalable. This is not solving the problem that React was trying to solve. It's really good to see this. So when we use JSX, it's going to be doing a lot of this under the hood. And I wanted you guys to be able to see this so that you kind of understand what's happening under the hood with JSX and how it's doing the things that it's doing. So instead of writing this here, Come on. There we go. So instead of writing that, we're going to create my element with JSX. And how we're going to do this is we're actually just going to create this HTML type looking JavaScript like this. This isn't exactly this isn't HTML. This is still JavaScript. So you have to realize that that's why we're still using class name here. But the syntax is now looking a lot better to what we're used to writing. Man, oh man. Okay. So, and then this is JavaScript, so we still need that semicolon. So now we've created my element with this HTML looking stuff right here, this JSX. So I'm going to save this file. I'm going to open this back up and refresh. And we're not rendering things. Even though I have my element and I'm still passing it to render, we're getting this syntax error here. That's because we're trying to write JSX just straight with JavaScript right here, but our JavaScript engine obviously doesn't understand this code. So in order to get away from doing all of this and using JSX, we need to bring in one more library, one more package here called Babel. So I'm going to post this inside our chat. So add this to your project here, to your file here. Now I'm going to save this and refresh our page. Oh, one more change we have to make. And that is to tell our script that our type is now text table. So we could have had JavaScript here, right? And that would have told our script tag to run this as straight JavaScript. But now we're going to port everything from inside the script tag through this library, and this will compile everything, including this JSX, and will kick out actual JavaScript that the browser understands. So we do that. We add our Babel package in our script. We're going to tell it to use that. And now we're back to our hello world. And look at this. We've got the same, even though we created our element with JSX, and it's different, looks different than creating it like this, we've got the same thing being console logged right here. Same children, same class name, key and ref are on there, the type is still H1. So this evaluates down to the exact same thing that this did, but this is a major abstraction from this that will help us be able to scale our project easier. Let's see, so a couple questions. Is it touchy on whether we use? I'm not sure right here. I think we're okay to use single. Yeah, I think we're okay to use single quotes. In my HTML, I'm just really used to writing double quotes inside for these. And since this is technically JavaScript, we can use our single quotes here. But I like to, in my mind, I like to be tricking my mind saying, hey, I'm actually writing HTML. And so to me, this feels a lot better to keep it as close to the actual HTML syntax to keep my brain happy. So that's why I do double quotes there. and single quotes inside JavaScript stuff. Okay, catch up to me. Get your code looking like this, and I'll give you about 1 minute to do so. Okay, hopefully you're at this point here. If not, I will cheat for you. Ba-ba-dum. So that should have everything we need. There's all our JavaScript. Okay, there you go. If you're stuck on some errors or something, or haven't gotten to this point, just grab it from that snippet. And okay. So now this is the basic foundation that we want to start building components with React to compose our website. So components are just pieces of UI, encapsulated pieces of UI. In other words, they're just a standalone piece of UI that we can compose our web applications using React. There's different types of components we can use. Today we're going to talk about the simplest, which is called a functional component. So we're going to get rid of this stuff here. I'm going to keep it here, and I'm going to share this code with you guys later so you have all of this to look at. My computer's taking a long time to think right now. I don't know why. All right, so functional components. There we go. So a functional component is just a function. We're going to create a function just like we would in JavaScript. It's a simple arrow function, and all it's going to do is return a piece of JSX. So let's just return the same piece of JSX right here. There we go. That is a component. I want you to think about the implication of this. So we know that we can use JavaScript to write this HTML stuff, this JSX, and we can pass that HTML node to this render function, and it will render that JSX stuff as real HTML inside our target node up here. So what if we could build, what do functions do in JavaScript? Functions execute some code and return something, right? So this right here, after our equal sign, is an anonymous function that's going to execute this code and return this JSX node to this variable right here. So in our computer memory, we've got a piece of memory that's dedicated to this variable and the value that it's holding, which right now is this this JSX node, right? Well, the value is this function, and as soon as this function gets called, then it's going to return this. So now we have the ability to pass functions back and forth between different parts of our application, and when we invoke that function, it's going to give us an entire DOM node. So this is where the power of React and JSX really comes into play, because we can now see, just as Patrick said, we can use this kind of a component to, like, this is extremely reusable now. If anywhere I have a header in H1, we'll learn how to make this dynamic so that this can change based on some other variables around here. But we can create H1 elements very quickly by just passing this component all around our application. So yeah, as Patrick said, it makes the code dry so we can produce multiple H1s with Hello World. Or we'll learn soon how to make this Hello World dynamic so we can give this this component a piece of data, a string, to render inside here. So then it becomes even more powerful, where we can have this reusable component render an H1 component with a dynamic string based on where it's at. Super, super cool. Yeah. I like what you're thinking, Patrick. This is awesome. This is getting me excited. Whew, cool stuff. Okay, so right now we can't continue this, so we need to do make one more little change for us to get this working again. Real question. So Tom says, can we use interpolation tags like? Yep, that's exactly right. So we will eventually be using brackets to pass in something here. That's a sneak peek at what is coming next. Okay, cool. Exciting things. So let's do this. Let's create a, we're going to hide this guy. Why do I keep doing that? We're going to hide this guy. And we're going to create a functional component called app. And it's just an arrow function like before. We're going to do this cool thing where we're going to wrap. So if we were looking at this, we could wrap this section in here in parentheses, and that basically means that this is a JavaScript expression that will get evaluated down to something. So you could do that around math things in JavaScript. You can basically wrap any JavaScript expression inside parentheses. What this gives us the ability to do within our JSX is write our JSX in multiple lines. So we can now drop a line down here, and we don't need to use curly brackets. So the alternate way, what we've seen before is to do this, right? And then say return, and then like our H1 header here. So this is just a shortcut. This is syntax sugar, is what we would call it, syntactical sugar to all of that. So you'll get used to this. This is a really, really common pattern. Okay, so we're going to do this, and we're going to create a div tag here. So now we're returning a multi-line JSX element like this. So that's what makes this really cool. Then inside here, we'll fill this with components in a minute. Dot, dot, dot. Okay, so we've got an app component, and let's pass this app component to our render function here. So we know that the render function just takes some DOM node, some React node right here. So we're actually going to pass it the app node that would be created if we had done it kind of like this. But we're not going to pass it a variable. So we're not capturing this in a variable. We're going to pass this component and render it here. And the way we do that is like so. Oh, but with capital. So quick note on this. This looks like HTML, and but we know that there's no HTML element called app. So this is another trick in React that we can use to pass around these components. So I talked about a little bit how we can pass around this basic component to create this H1 header and render this H1 header all over our application. So the way that we actually pass it around and invoke it in order to do that is by wrapping it in tags, in HTML type tags like this. So we could wrap our basic component like that. And we could pass our basic component to our render. So when you see this type of thing, and it's common practice to use capital camel case with the capital first letter, same with our app here, to signify, to tell our other developers that this is a component. So we've built a component. This is how we render it on the DOM. Yep, you can do that. You can invoke it just like any other function there, and it would return basically what we saw right here. But this is how we do it. This is how we quote unquote invoke it within JSX. Okay, so let's take a look at, let's save this file and let's take a look at our app. So this doesn't work because inside HTML, this is not how we comment stuff out. But that's why that's showing up there. So let's inspect this. And inside our div, our target div from way up here, remember this guy? This is what is where all of our stuff is getting shoved into right here. Don't forget about me. So there's our target div, and you'll notice inside of our target div, we just have a div. But wait a second, I thought we had this app looking component, right? So why do you think this is showing up as a div and not this app component here? Yep, you guys are all correct. So this app is basically like invoking this function, right? So we don't actually get the component. What we're doing here is returning this div. And then this div is what gets passed into our target div inside here. It's so cool. So now, instead of doing something like this up here, where we were passing in my element, and it was putting this inside there. We've now created, using a function, a component, and we're passing that component inside our target div, but React knows that that component is returning a div. And that's what actually gets rendered. It's so cool. Okay, what I want everybody to do at some point is download the React tools, the React Chrome extension. After the lesson, I'll drop the link for it here. But when we have a React app, we may not be able to use it here. Okay, that's okay. We'll talk about this another day. So let's just stay within our elements tag. But what that's going to do for us is give us the ability to look at our actual components. So it'll build a similar looking tree, but with our components inside there as well. That's really cool. Okay, so now we want to actually fill this with some reusable stuff. So let's say, remember I told you that we can use this type of syntax to use a component inside JSX. So let's go inside a component, and we'll use this syntax to use this component here. So we'll do this basic component. Now we should see, when we refresh the screen, we should see this inside our div tags. There we go. And there we have it. Reusable functional component right there. Mind blown. It's so cool. Coming away from a physical classroom as a teacher, this is probably the hardest part, transitioning to virtual class where I can't look at all of you and see like heads nodding and like smiles and like light bulbs clicking and like, oh, this is so cool. That's okay. Thank you. Thank you, the emojis and all this helps. So just look at this. This is all stuff that we understand. This is all JavaScript. We've got functions. We don't understand JSX quite as much, but it looks similar to enough that we can definitely start using this. We know that app is a function and it's just going to return this JSX, so we can put it here and it's going to render everything that's inside our app. It's super cool. Let's see. Okay, cool. So let's build out a couple more quick components since we're having fun with this. Let's do a button. Let's call it basic button. And it's going to return a button. So you may notice that okay, I could put a thing there, but not going to. Okay, if you put semicolons, you can't put a semicolon here because it's wrapped inside this parentheses. So it would actually render out on the screen as just text because it's going to take everything inside the parentheses as JSX. You'll notice that I didn't have to, even though we're in JavaScript, I didn't have to escape this character here because we're pushing this through Babel, remember, and Babel knows that this is text inside a button. So what do we do to render this button inside our app component? What am I going to type right here on line 34? Perfect. Good job, Tom. Basic button. Save that. I'm going to do that. Click me on the button. Hooray. There we go. There's our button. There's our H1. Awesome. Let's do an input. I'm going to do this with curly braces just so you see kind of the difference there. It's kind of up to you how you want to do that. So then I'm going to do an input, and it's going to be type equals text. And it's self-closing now. Since I'm not wrapped inside here, I can do my semicolon at the end of this line. Okay, so just like before, nope, we want to do, just like before, we're going to render this inside our app. And there we go. Okay, this is React. We're building simple components that all take care of, they have the one thing they're taking care of, and we're composing our web application with our components. So this is, you've heard me say that a couple of times. We're composing our app like this with these components. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This syntax here. We know that basic input has a job of returning a basic input. So we're going to put that here, and we know that it will render our basic input. Same with all these other. Let's change this because this is a bad name for what that component is doing. So this component is rendering a basic header. Okay, that is the foundation, the fundamentals of React. Now, we can take, we can build out other. Let's see. I don't think this is in a folder. We can break these out into other files, which I'm going to show you in a second because we actually do that in the project today. And we would put this. Let's see. Let me open this up a different way. Save everything here. Oh, and it looks like we've got some questions. Okay, so we'll probably go into for about 10 more minutes here before we'll be done. Give me 1 second. Okay, so I'm gonna close this one out. And we're gonna look at this one. Okay, before we do this real quick, I am going to answer these questions, and then we'll look at how to do this in different files, and then I'll show you the project for today. Okay, so Patrick, Patrick's giving us a Is this a question or this is, oh, this is the actual app question. Okay, I see the question mark now. Yep, you'll get used to what errors you'll see there. I'm going to share my code so you can open it up and kind of compare and see where you got this from. You may, one place to look is if you had done this on your script tag. Maybe no, because then you would be hitting an error there. Yeah, you'll just have to compare and see why that's happening. Can you only use get element by ID? So you need to put this on what we want to put IDs on what. Yeah, so I know you've kind of gotten used to the idea that, oh, IDs are bad and scary because of the laws of specificity. That's good. Down here in our JSX, we don't want to use a lot of IDs. In fact, I don't remember the last time I used an ID. Anyways, so this is just general practice. We want to be very specific on how we are grabbing this DOM node in order to shove all of our React code inside here with get element by ID. You could very easily do by class or something else, but this is pretty much the accepted practice to use an ID. There could be some case where you want to do some stuff outside of your React code here, and maybe someone would come and do. I think that we need a bunch of these to be class target. I don't know. We know with IDs that within one HTML file there should only be one ID called target. And so this is just a way to kind of avoid this situation and rendering not being able to render the correct thing in the correct place or rendering it twice. So yeah. Then so we've got, let's see. Did you use brackets instead of at some point? Oh yeah, maybe you use brackets here, Patrick. Maybe you did something like that. If you want to use brackets, you have to have the return. If you want to use brackets with the return and you have something that's multi-lined like this, you would still have to wrap. So if we did use brackets and we get a return here, we would still have to wrap this in parentheses to make this multi-lined like that. Let's see. So why does basic input use brackets? That was just a way to show two different ways of doing it so that you can see the syntax difference in both ways. Is placeholder the same as value when used inside input? Ooh, good question. No. So value will actually put text inside of this. So we'll get into that, I think, the end of this week, using inputs within React, because that's hairy stuff right there. So value actually inserts text where placeholder just gives you that background placeholder text. But more to come on inputs later. Tom's answering this question. Okay, can we use query selector instead of get element by ID? Probably, but this is what you'll see everyone use. So I would stick with this syntax right here. When you're just doing the one thing here, then it's not going to be any kind of performance issues. Okay, are there ever going to be instances where you want the return instead of? Yep. So what if let's imagine that we wanted to, this will be kind of stuff we cover tomorrow, but what if we wanted to say, let's do some more JavaScript inside this function. So we're going to change this to braces, and we're going to say const emotion text equals happy. Then we're going to return our JSX here, but instead of just doing this in here, we're going to, instead of just typing out text inside here, we're going to turn this into a JavaScript expression. So if we want to evaluate a JavaScript expression inside our JSX, we wrap it in braces like this. So now you can see that it's all messed up because this is now a JavaScript expression instead of text. If we want it to be text, we'd have to do something like this. And now you can see where before we didn't have to escape our characters, now we have to escape our characters because we're literally writing in JavaScript inside our brackets. So this is a sneak peek for tomorrow. Don't worry too much about this right now. Just showing why there's a difference here. So instead of doing this, let's make this an interpolated string. And let's say, let's do this. Let's say emotion text. And then we'll render that. Errors. There we go. Now we have the text, click me, I'm a happy button. So when you have some sort of other JavaScript you want to do inside this function, remember this is just a function. I know these are components, but they're just functions. We can do other things inside of them other than just return stuff. So if we want to do something like that, which we do quite often, then we need to use brackets because we don't want this to be part of our return. So let's change this one now. We'll leave these two examples like this so you can see the difference there. Okay, cool. Sorry, answering those questions took a little bit longer. We'll cruise through this and look at the project. So Melanie asked, why didn't you have to use parentheses up here? Really good question. We could, but we get this cool thing with ES6, where if we have a arrow function, then we have what's called an implied return. And so if we were just doing another function that didn't have JSX, that was just returning like an object or something or a string, we could write an arrow function, and whatever came after this arrow function, if it's a one-line arrow function, it would just return this. It knows to return this right here. So when we use brackets or parentheses when we want to drop down a line and do something like this. So it's pretty much like this right here without the return. We could write return, but with arrow functions, you can see it's not turning blue. Arrow functions have that implied return if it's a one-liner. So it's just a trick we use to keep our code concise if it's something super small like this. Cool, cool, cool. Okay, really fast. We'll just do this with one component, and I'll show you how to break this out. So let's do this with our, we're going to call it basic input dot JS. And then we're going to get rid of this. Actually, copy it and I need to do that. Oh yeah, let's do that. Now, this is one thing you'll see with JSX is commenting out code is actually kind of a pain, but that's okay. Post this in here. And now let me see, let me look at how our project is doing this. So if we wanted to do this, we'd have to, I don't think we can do this in this simple example here. But what we're going to do is in your project, you're going to have, our project is set up with the Babel built out to hit every single JavaScript file so that we can write JSX. So the problem here is this is just a JavaScript file, and I can't do JSX inside of here. And we've set it up for you in your project to take care of this issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you just this file here and give you the syntax so that you can see, have a reference to using multiple files inside your application so we can be using, kind of keep things separated. Okay, so we're going to, this is just the input file. We would make another file for our button and another file for our header. And so what we're going to do is we're going to export this function away from this file so that we can import it somewhere else. And the Babel and the way that we have the project set up for you takes care of handling that. But we need to write export, and then this default, we'll get into that a little bit later in the course, but you'll want to write export default and then the function name and the rest of your functionality here. And then you won't run into these errors because it'll already be set up that every JS file will be going through Babel to let you write JSX in these JS files. So then we're exporting this as the default. So we're going to come to the top of our code, and we would say import basic input from, so we're importing that function, that component from, and then we just give it a path name. So you guys know how to do this with like CSS, you know how path names work. It's the exact same that we'll do here while we're importing our JavaScript, our component. So we're going to import this from basic input. And then, by the way, when it goes through this Babel Webpack flow, and it gives us all this cool syntax here and JSX stuff, you don't need to add the extensions. So makes it a little bit shorter. So now, instead of having it here, it would still work that's exported and available to you within this script tag here, or this file here. So this is the combining piece. You're going to export by the default, and then import it here. Okay, I wanted to get to that. I know we're into our lunchtime, but you would be very lost in your project without seeing this. Cool, so let's look at the project and then send you guys off to lunch. Oh, let's see. What happened? Oh, right. I remember because our Lambda learn.lambda school was down. Okay, so the project today is inside this repo here, and you've got 2 days of projects. So today is going to be social card. And what we're going to do, so you want to come to this repo and read this first README file. It's going to tell you how to initialize everything. So follow these steps exactly. Reach out to your PM if you get stuck on something here. Then read the instructions. So the first day you'll work on project social card. The second day, tomorrow, we're going to work on calculator. Use the design files to build out your user interfaces. We've provided the HTML files. We've provided the JS files for you. It's all been set up within a React JS environment, which we'll learn how to do our own setup later. There's going to be notes in the project. Pay attention to those notes as you're working on this. Feel free to include Bootstrap if you'd like in your HTML, and that will include Bootstrap style sheet globally for all of your components. So you just need to bring that in once in your HTML, and you can use that anywhere. And then don't forget class name versus class. Okay, so day one, social card. Your social card is going to be this project right here. And we want to start thinking in React, thinking about building things into different components. Oh, we haven't gone over Bootstrap. Okay, don't worry about it. If you know Bootstrap, then you can include it. Flexbox is built into the browser, so we're good that way. Okay, so go through the steps, read through these here, and basically what you're going to be doing is building out these components here. We've got the file structure all for you, and I'll show you that. So as you go into day one social card, you'll see the design files, which is right here. So this is what you're trying to build. And then you'll see our actual social card here. So this is the project that you'll be running in your browser. So inside your source is where you'll find where we're doing the React DOM render. Kind of explore through these. App.js is what opens up first in the browser, and we're exporting that to our index.js and rendering it here. And then inside your components is where you'll be doing your coding. So inside the components directory, you'll see the card component, the footer component, and the header components. And you'll see your container, your header container, which is, so you're going to build out the actual content in these 3 smaller components. You'll render these 3 smaller components inside your header component, and you'll render your header component inside your app component. It sounds confusing now, but just take it one step at a time, and you'll be able to get that all taken care of. Okay, awesome. Sorry for going over. Obviously, jumping into this new stuff takes a lot because I want you to understand the whys and the fundamentals. So I'll post this on the Slack channel, and I'll send over this code that we went through as well. And yeah, have a great lunch, and let us know what we can do to help you guys out. Thanks, guys.